Good morning, Johnny Reb Gamers. Today will be part 2 of resolving charges. Yesterday we covered the first 3 steps on the infantry charge procedure, where we charge unit revealed the order and designated the charge target. We rolled for charge bonus and calculated at which point the charge goes in disorder. It also determines where the end of the charge winds up. And we rolled 1 dice for a point of the defensive volley in the hope of halting the attacker at that point. Today we're going to cover the most exciting part that can really make quite a change in the war game: dice down for impact. The important thing to note in the dice down for impact is the low total wins, and if it's a tie it goes to melee. On the right side of the chart is the basic morale points of the unit, and then the morale point modifiers that we go down the column on, adding or subtracting. Again, both units involved in the charge are going to roll 2 dice, plus or minus the modifiers, and the low roll wins. Depending on who the winner is, the chart also conveniently shows if the defender wins, what happens, and if the attacker wins, what happens. Now on the front of the chart, it's important to also notice that depending on what formation you're in, may have impact morale modifiers. On the left of the movement rate column, you'll see the different formations. All the way on the right on the front page is the impact morale. For instance, in this example, the +6 is if you were charged and you were still in skirmish line. +6 would be very bad. Pluses are bad in impact, minuses are good, because remember, after rolling 2 dice with the modifiers, the winner is the one who rolls the lowest. I forgot to mention yesterday, the whole resolving charge sequence is on pages 41 to page 50. And today specifically, page 49 tells you how to determine the impact dice down and calculate the impact morale. So I'll go through that. I did start the video earlier. I'm going to leave these die roll numbers, what I rolled, because it's going to work out for what I'm trying to teach. We're going to go over both, though, with how to figure out morale. We're going to start here with this here. My dear old friend Dean West would put down dice to show what the morale is for each unit when he was the game master of Final Arguments of Kings, and also a big supporter of Johnny Reb and a good friend of John Hill. So I'm going to do it his way because it really takes away any confusion for the players by marking what the basic morale is and then going down the chart for the morale point modifiers. So in this case, we're going to start off with the Confederates. You start off with a basic morale for veterans of 3. Again, on the right lower portion of the back of the chart, you have morale point modifiers, as you can see. Your basic morale point for veterans 3. You go down the chart, there's no officer present. The unit is charging, so that will take that down to a 2. Going down the rest of the chart, they're not behind cover in woods, they're not in hasty or heavy works, they're not behind friendlies, there is a section lost, so that's a +3, so that would change the 2 to a 5. And then there's no partial flank, they're not shaken, they're not routed, there's no rear, they're not in disorder, they're not in condition hold or forming, so their modified morale point would be 5. For the Union, you have veteran unit with their morale of 3. You go down the chart and there are no other modifiers. So again, both units are now going to roll 2 dice. The Confederates are going to add 5, and the Union's going to add 3. Now, being veteran gamers that we are, we like to simplify things, so instead of adding 5 and adding 3 to our rolls, 5 minus 3 is 2, so to make it simple, we're going to add 2 to the Confederate die roll. So in this case, we are going to roll for the Confederates, adding 2. They rolled a 7 plus a 2, gives them a total of 9. Remember, low roll wins on the die roll and impact. So now we're going to roll for the Union, who has a good chance of winning with the roll of 9 for the Confederates. And they rolled a 6. So 6 is lower than a 9. So in this case, the Confederates have lost. If you look on the chart for infantry charge procedure, if you look right down here, you see if defender wins, the attacker falls back in disorder 1 die from the defender. Both sides now fire a simultaneous 2 dice volley regardless of the range. So the Confederates lost in this case. So I'm going to roll 1 dice to see how far they go back. And they're going to go back 4 inches. So they go back 4 inches. They are not shaken. They're not in disorder. They just fall back. Has they lost? I'm sorry. They do fall back in disorder. And they go back 4 inches since they lost. And that now they do a tight 2 dice volley. Now remember, because the Confederate Union is in disorder, when the Union shoots at them, it would be a +3 for shooting at on their die roll for shooting at a disordered unit. So that's the way that charge would end. In that case, the Confederates were driven off. Now, if by some chance they had won and got lucky with their roll, remember their charge would have continued all the way to the red marker, their full distance, going into disorder at the yellow marker. And depending on whether this unit would have fallen back past the red marker, if they hadn't, there would be a melee wherever they made contact. So let's do this charge. Again, I'm going to keep the die rolls that I rolled yesterday when I was making a tape and messed things up, so I started over, but the die rolls are good to keep. I'm going to go over the morale of this particular charge because there's multiple factors. Going down the chart again, your basic morale for a veteran unit is a 3. Their charging brings it down 1 to a 2. They have a leader with the charge, brings it to a 1. But the front unit has a stand missing, which is a +3, so that makes it a 4. Now, having supporting units though, and you're going to see why supporting units are important, it's a -1 for each supporting unit. So that brings the 4 down to a 3 and then down to a 2. So for impact, you're going to have the Confederates at 2. For the Union, you start off a veteran unit at 3. You have a -1 for a general is 2. And then you have 1 supporting unit, brings it down to a 1. So again, you're both going to roll 2 dice. The Confederates would add 2, and the Union would add 1. Or, as gamers do simply, you're just going to add 1 to the Confederate die roll to make things simpler. So in this case, I had already rolled, like I said, and we had a roll of 7 for the Confederates, which makes it 8 for the +1. We had a roll for the Union of 10, so the Union lost the charge. Lost in the charge. So if you look here, we have a separate chart from if defender wins, if attacker wins. If attacker wins, the defender falls back in disorder, 2 dice from the attacker. Now, a big part of this roll is determining their morale also. If it's a 2 to 4, they're still in good morale. It's a 5 to 8, they're unshaken. 9 to 11, routed, and 12 picked up. Another important part of this is if you are failed, the defender failed, you want to try to get farther on the roll than how far the charge goes, in this case right here. So we're going to do that. They rolled 9 inches. So the Union regiment would be passed and wind up here, shaken and disordered. Okay? Let's recorrect that. I'm sorry. On the chart for 9, they would be routed going 9 inches. So Let's re-roll it. Let's go 6 inches to make this the more teaching moment. 6 inches on the chart. Yeah, 5 to 8 is shaken, and they only go 6 inches. So they didn't make it out past how far the charge goes. So they would go back 6 inches. They would be in this order. And they would be shaken. And put the yellow marker in there for shaken. Now, the supporting unit would also have to roll. And they went back 8 inches. 8 inches on the chart is shaken also. So they'd go back 8 inches. They would be in this order. And they would be shaken. And they would be shaken. So now what we do, and why the marker is so important, showing where the unit goes in this order, the Confederates would continue the charge. Now, because it's past the yellow marker, which is half the distance of the bonus movement, they would be in disorder when they go into impact. So the supporting units simply go in behind them. Okay. Now we're going to go into melee. Melee is very bloody. You're going to count up the total number of figures in each unit and roll 4 dice and then double the casualties on the chart results table. Regarding supporting units, you're going to count all the figures in the front unit and then half the figures in the rear units. So here we have 9, and then we had 12, which is 6, plus 6 more. We have 12 plus 9 is 21 figures. The Union has 12 figures. Again, you're going to roll 4 dice in melee. Now, however, because the Union is shaken, they lose a dice, so they're only going to roll 3 dice, and the Confederates are going to roll 4 for melee. So we're going to do that very simply on the chart. Just for example, we're going to roll a very good roll for Union. It is 16, and you get a +1 for a leader. So on the 16 chart, 12 figure chart on the left of the combat results table, and you roll a 16, that results in 4 figures. Now 4 figures doubled is 8. So the Confederates are going to take 8 casualties. Now, in a melee, it's important to remember that all the casualties are on the front unit in melee. It's not like firing at the unit charging where there's half casualties on the units behind that are in support. In this case, all 8 casualties will go on the front unit only on the Confederates. So, having said that, let's roll now for the Confederates. We have 21 guys, which puts it on the 20 chart on the figures firing. We're going to roll 4 dice. We have a total of 16. And we have a +1 for the general. That makes it 17. So on the chart of 20, all the way up to 17, that is going to be 6 figures. Double the casualties, which will make it 12 figures that are killed in the unit, which happens to be the whole entire unit. So that unit would be picked up because all its figures were killed. If it had been lesser, let's say 9 for example, that would have left you 1 stand there. And you would have had to do a morale check on that unit for each stand missing. So you would have had to do a morale check for first casualty on the Union, and then each stand afterwards. So it would have been a total of 4 morale checks if they hadn't picked up. So let's pretend that happened. Let's pretend, for example, let's do the morale checks on the Union. So your morale was a 3. General, that makes it a 2. But you were shaken, that makes it a 5. So on your first roll for first casualty, you would have had to roll above a 5. And they did, so they passed. Now you would roll for the first stand missing. We have a 5 plus 3 more. You'd have to roll above an 8. They did not beat an 8, so at that point they would rout. If they had passed, they'd do another morale check with another stand loss, which would have made it 8 to 11. You have to roll above an 11. So that's how that's done. Now the Confederates have to do some checks too. They had 8 casualties. So in this particular unit up front, you're going to have 2 stands missing plus 2 figures. And again, marking left to right as best you can. You'd have to do a morale check on that front unit. So let's do that. So let's do, they already had a stand loss, remember? So let's do the morale check for a stand loss. So they have a 3, minus 1 for charging, makes it a 2, minus 1 for leader, makes it a 1, plus 2 stands lost is 3 and 3, makes it a 7, minus 1 for support is 6, minus 1 for non-report is 5, so they have to be a 5 for that first stand loss, and they do. Now they have another stand loss, so you'd add 3 more. So again, start off with a 3, stand loss, charging makes it a 2, leader makes it a 1, plus 3 stands lost is 3, 3, 3 is 9, that's 10, minus 1 for support, 8, minus 1 more is 7, they'd have to be the 7, and they did not. So what that would mean is that unit would stop right there and go in shaken. What the other units would do, remember those picked up, the other units would end up with the charge being at where the charge ended in this order. You can move things around to make room if you need to, being there's only 1 stand left there, and the supporting units will wind up there. And that, my friends, is how impact is done. I may do another video to give other scenarios on impact. Now, one thing that I want to mention that was important that I did forget, when that union routed and picked up, or it routed, other units nearby within 6 inches would have to check morale. For instance, this unit here would have to check morale of seeing a routed unit. So they would be a 3, plus shaken is a 5. Seeing the routed unit, they have to check morale. And they did the perfect roll of routing. Snake Eyes is always a rout. They would rout for rolling a Snake Eyes. If they hadn't beaten a 5, like they rolled a 7, they would have stayed shaken. If they hadn't beaten a 5, they would have routed. But the Snake Eyes was also a roll and the game that whenever you roll a Snake Eyes, a 1 and a 1, it's an instant rout. If you roll a 12, it's an instant rally. So there you have the second phase of charging. It's covered specifically the impact dice down on page 49 and resolving melees on page 50. The whole charge sequence on page 41 to 50. Have a great day. See you next time.